Alrighty, so I've already put the window regulator up in place with the motor still where it was hanging. And now the process through these 3 holes is to bolt the motor up to the regulator. I've got one socket on one screw in there, and I've got another screw in. And a trick to really hold the screw on your Allen wrench good is put a little piece of tape on first and then shove it over. That way it's a real tight fit. And it's a little tricky to bolt this motor up to the regulator, of course, because you can't really see except by looking through the holes to get the holes lined up. Now you may need to move this gear slightly in order to mesh up with the drive gear on the motor. So you can do that right through here. Okay, so I've got, what also helps is to have a flashlight that can focus on a pinpoint so that you can look all the way through and see threads. That's what you want to see in there, is threads. Then, once you get things lined up, then wiggle the motor around a little bit as you get the screws started. Those of you that don't have patience, you don't want to be doing this job, because it requires some patience to get this motor mounted on there. There is a shoulder right here on each one of these bosses for the bolts, and that shoulder goes in the depression. But at the same time, this gear has to mesh with the gear, the big gear, or you are just not going to get anywhere. That happens to line up the way it's supposed to. But if it's off a little bit, you want to at least get one started, and then apply a little pressure right here, like so, with your one arm, while you reach behind and push on this motor so that it will engage in the big gear, and then you're ready for putting in the rest of the screws. And it's handy to have more than one Allen wrench. So I've got one Allen wrench, a socket, and another Allen wrench, so that you can apply some force pushing on the screws in order to get the threads started. And once you have them all started, then you can start tightening them up. Then you tighten up the mounts. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of these regulators have this provision for an additional mount, but there's no mount there. So you need to scavenge one off of a parts regulator, or off of your old regulator if you aren't using it anymore, so that you can mount one in there. This is a left front regulator, and I've mounted one in here for it, which is handy because then I can put this up to the holes on the inside of the door and move it around in order to make a mark where I need to drill a hole for this additional mount. I have done it without using one, just by guessing. You want to drill a small hole first so that if it doesn't line up, you can drill another small hole and so on until you get one that's centered. Then you can put a big hole in and you're all set for that additional mount that will help stabilize these regulators, because they aren't that great a design to start with because they get warped all out of shape. Okay, I usually wait till it's assembled somewhat before I put the grease on, just so it doesn't end up being a mess. But once you get it in there, I use a toothbrush and get some grease on those teeth. They will spread around once you operate it somewhat. And also you want to smear some grease into this spring, because those surfaces of the spring slide against each other, and if they get rusty, then your window doesn't really want to go up and down that well. Okay, then this is a handy impact wrench. It doesn't have a lot of power, but for small bolts like this, you don't want a lot of power or you'll break them off. But you never trust an impact wrench, so you always want to use your ratchet and make sure that everything is tightened appropriately. Then it's just hooking up these wires, and green to green and black to black. Okay, as I had my cameraman run the regulator arm down a bit, I added grease so that we now have grease well dispersed. And this is about the right position that you want for the regulator arm to assemble it on the window. Now, what you've got here is a spring clip, a nylon washer, and another nylon guide piece. So this guide piece goes on first, then the track goes on here that's on the bottom of the glass, and then this washer. Note that from the factory, this disperser washer is supposed to go on there. But you're going to find that it's almost impossible to get this assembled with this, because it gets caught in the ring that the clip goes in. And then you can't get the clip on the ring. Now, let me get it caught in there. That's what happens. And then you can't get the clip on. So, forget this. Not that necessary. And just put the clip on. So I've been pushing this glass down and finding that it is binding something fierce, which is not good. So I'm going to push this back up. Oh, man. And I'm going to lube up these tracks a little bit, but first I'm going to loosen this guide right here. There's a 10mm headed bolt on the bottom side. And let's see if I've got any play. There is a little bit of play. Now, this old grease is not only really sticky now, but there's a lot of dust that is now adhered to this. So we're going to push this glass all the way up, and I'm going to use a rag with some solvent and clean this really well and re-lubricate it. Okay, so I've got this guide cleaned up pretty good, and it does move up and down much better. And I'm going to clean this guide as well, because it's all crudted up. Get both sides. Okay, now I pulled out the 2 bolts here on this cover, and that's pretty crudted up as well. So I'm going to clean that, and this guide right here, I'm going to clean that as well and re-grease it. This nylon rail goes together thusly with the R up. Otherwise, if it's put on backwards, the window won't go all the way down, and that's what we just discovered, that somebody had put it together wrong. So we're going to put it together right. Now I noticed that these holes wouldn't line up properly. So this needs adjusting right here. Loosen that. Then assemble this. So that we get our bolts lining up properly. Much better. All right, whenever you have your door panel off, you don't do it every time, but when you have your door panel off, you want to get some grease in here. On the various components. It helps to use a flashlight so you can get it around in there, because that will help your latch function better. Then roll your membrane down, and this is important to have one of these to keep the moisture off of your door panel. Now, what I prefer, rather than having the bottom on the inside, what I do is put that bottom part over on that side like that. And that way, your moisture won't run down onto your door panel at the bottom. It'll stay inside the door, like so. Okay, you also want to put just a little bit of lubricant on that pivot. And there's a second pivot where the rod goes. That will give that a little more life. Then, on the 116s, there's these hooks. This one's broken off. These hooks go in the slots, and there's supposed to be tangs that hook in here. This one's broken off. That one's still there, that one's still there. So, to put this on is tricky. Now, all us mechanics wish we had like 4 arms, but since we don't, the trick is to have the bungee to hook on this top hinge and pop out the cover for access to the screws that hold the outer handle on. And then you can apply pressure with a bungee to push the top on as you use your hands to push the bottom on. So you want to start by getting your latch release knob. So we're going to have our lock button in place. Screw it on a couple of turns, and then with the door panel just under the mirror adjusting lever, we're going to grab our bungee and pull it over to our slot there. And that's going to keep these upper tangs on where they belong so that I can push on the bottom of the panel and get the lower hooks in place. That's the way you do it.